Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the role of the United Kingdom in the European Union. British voters are expected to cast ballots before the end of 2017 on their future in the EU. Joining me now here in the studio is Simon Marks. He is the president and chief correspondent for Feature Story News. And joining us from Cologne is German journalist Ulrike Winkelmann. Welcome to both of you to the show. Simon, let me start with you. How did it get to this, to a referendum? There has been opposition to Britain's membership in the European Union, as Richard Bestick pointed out, way back to the Thatcher years. But now a referendum.
Well, because David Cameron found himself boxed in, largely by members of his own Conservative Party. In the last general election, he found that in order to secure his own leadership position, he needed to go to the public, promising a referendum during the lifetime of this Parliament in Britain. Most people think that referendum will come sometime in 2017. And this is an extraordinary historical inflection point, boosted in part by the rise to prominence of the Nationalist Party, the UK Independence Party, which is viscerally anti-Europe. But you have here David Cameron, the leader of the Conservative Party, which back in the 1970s was the party that took Britain into the EU, then known as the Common Market, as the result of a referendum, now trying to quiet restive members of his own party who, as the result of a referendum, want to bring Britain out of the European Union. So that shows you how far the debate has shifted in the years since 1970.
Ulrike, what is the view in Europe? I mean, how concerned are Germans that the United Kingdom might opt to leave the EU?
The sheer thought of such a Brexit sends waves of panic through all parties that are in Parliament, because Britain leaving the EU means nothing but one of the three large powers leaving this very complicated structure where all the big powers also rely on each other, keeping it upright even in times of such a crisis as in the moment. You know, managing the refugee crisis is one of the biggest challenges to the EU since I don't know when, and now Britain talking about leaving the EU means that there's another building site which actually at the moment can't be managed.
Simon, why this deep unhappiness in Britain over the European Union? And what is David Cameron's personal view on this?
The leading officials in Brussels have always been tremendous figures of controversy and fun. The Fleet Street newspapers have always thrown extraordinary amounts of mud at Brussels, insisting that it's trying to take power away from London. This phrase that exists in EU treaties, the move towards an ever closer union. In other words, you never get to a point where you stop. You're always moving towards a closer and closer union that opponents of the European Union argue will ultimately diminish British sovereignty and indeed denude British sovereignty. David Cameron's own personal position is like that of so many other leaders of Europe, like that of President Obama, like that of President Xi Jinping of China. He thinks, personally, this would be a bad move for Britain, but what he wants is to try and negotiate a stronger position for Britain within the European Union, and he's looking to European Union leaders, and he's not the first British Prime Minister to do this, to give him more so that he can go back to that restive caucus within his own party and say, look, I've got us a better deal there.
Is that the reason the referendum has been pushed out to 2017? Gives him time to get reforms?
Yes, I mean, the timing of this is very perilous under any circumstances, whenever he does this. But right now, you want to try and move politically. You want to try and move that referendum as far away as you possibly can from headlines pertaining to the migrant crisis in Europe. The more those headlines go on, the more they have the potential to stoke the fuel and the flames of nationalist sentiment in Britain. So he's really looking to put distance between the headlines and the referendum, and also to buy himself more time to negotiate a better deal.
Right. You mentioned UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, earlier on. Its leader, Nigel Farage, is vehemently opposed to Britain's membership in the European Union. Ulrike, I have a question for you, but first let's listen to what Nigel Farage had to say. Let's watch.
There is, I think, a bright star on the horizon. It's called the British referendum. And given given that none of you want to concede Britain the ability to take back control of our own borders, a Brexit now looks more likely than at any point in modern time, and I hope and pray that Britain voting to leave the European Union will be the beginning of the end of a project, however noble its original intentions, has gone rotten.
Ulrike, Farage is highly critical of Germany, says that Germany has become too powerful in Europe. Does he have a point?
In a way, I would never agree with him on anything, but of course the management of the euro crisis, the management of the Greek crisis this year was mainly up to Angela Merkel and the German government. So through managing this crisis, the German power has somewhat become more has come more to the surface. It has been there all way long, one must say. The sheer economic power of Germany, its enormous export power, has in a way been ruling the euro crisis and the financial crisis all the way since 2008, but it has never become as easily to be seen as this year.
But there's an inconsistency, isn't there, in what Farage says? Because if you argue that Germany is too powerful, you have to concede that Britain leaving the European Union will only make Germany more powerful among the states that remain within the European Union. And that's an inconsistency that Farage hasn't answered.
Right. One of the arguments being made by those who oppose European Union membership, I'll get to you in a moment, Ulrike, is to adopt what they call the Norway model. Norway is not a member of the EU, but enjoys some of its benefits and has EU obligations. It pays the EU fees. It is within the EU immigration agreement. So is there two sides to that argument?
Well, there are two sides to the argument, but the Norway model plays the promotion of the Norway model by opponents of British membership in the European Union plays directly into the hands of people who want Britain to stay in the European Union, because they can say, and it's a great headline, Britain is not Norway. And Britain genuinely is not Norway. Britain is home to $587 billion of US investment. And much of that US investment goes through London as a glide path into Europe. American corporations are going to question that degree of investment in Britain if Britain pulls out. Right. Norway doesn't have that magnetic ability to pull that kind of investment in.
Ulrike, you wanted to say?
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that the German power very much relies on the management of the euro. So this is a problem that doesn't affect Britain at all. The point which affects Britain is, of course, the German export power. But at the same time, you must say that it is German direct investment in Britain, which is in danger then, and all the trade relationships going through Germany onto the continent, also relying on EU structures. So if Nigel Farage really thinks that Germany is a hegemon in Europe, he really should think about the true nature of the economic relations then.
But Ulrike, is there an appreciation in Germany of David Cameron's point that Europe needs to be reformed?
Yes, everybody says Europe needs to be reformed. The financial crisis has really, to everyone's eyes, conservative just as well as left eyes, made clear that the European Union does not work in the way that we thought maybe it might work the next 10 or 20 years. And the point in having an ever closer union, meaning that deepening the relationships will always come to a better end, is that you have to work on European structures in order to make them work better. But you can't just unravel them like you can a pullover or something. Just put the wool back on the Noel. But you have to work on the relationships. You have to work on the structures in order to make them function better. You can't just pull out and say that was that, because you will then have really years and years of turmoil which will shake the markets, shake the societies, and after all have a lot of societies move to the wrong side of the political spectrum, meaning that there will be more nationalism, there will be a setback in European relations back to the 19th century maybe.
Simon, Britain does have relationships with other countries. As we've just seen, President Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, has just been in Britain. Very successful visit. How much of an impact will Britain's withdrawal from the EU have on that relationship?
Well, they say Xi Jinping is urging Britain to stay within the European Union because he sees British involvement in the European Union as something that strengthens the European Union, and he's all in favour of the European Union emerging as more of a counterbalance to US dominance. It's one of those issues that unites Xi Jinping and Barack Obama. Barack Obama doesn't want Britain leaving the EU for all those reasons relating to British investment. And the No campaign has a problem, which is that you have world leaders saying, please stay in. The Irish Prime Minister set up a crisis team to deal with the eventuality of a Brexit. But you've also got industry, unanimously virtually in the UK, saying this would be crazy for us to do if we walked away from this. There are now more powerful voices in Britain that are expressing the view that renegotiated, Britain can get more of what it wants and avoid the catastrophe that would be caused by a departure.